There is something about you that others notice, even when you remain unaware of it. It is not always your words nor your actions, but something deeper, something unspoken. A presence, a signal, a quiet force that reveals more than you intend. People are constantly interpreting what stands before them, not only through logic, but through the unconscious. And what they secretly see in you is often not what you think you are showing. It is what you are. Beneath the surface, unfiltered, unhidden, there are qualities within you that disturb, inspire, or intrigue others, not because you display them openly, but because they emerge naturally from your being. When you walk into a room, something in others begins to respond. Some feel drawn toward you without understanding why. Others feel uneasy, even threatened, without any clear reason. This reaction is not random, it is psychological. What people see in you often reflects what they are unable to accept within themselves. If you carry confidence that was built through struggle, those who doubt themselves will feel exposed in your presence. If you remain calm in chaos, those who depend on disorder will feel unsettled by your stillness. If you choose authenticity, those hiding behind illusions will sense their masks weakening around you. You do not need to prove anything. Your inner state speaks louder than effort ever could. There is also something else, something more subtle yet more powerful, your shadow, the part of you that you have ignored, suppressed, or denied. Others can sense it even when you cannot. It appears in your tone, your hesitation, your reactions, and it shapes how people respond to you. If your shadow remains unconscious, it controls your presence in ways you do not understand. But when you begin to face it, to integrate it, something changes. You become whole, and that wholeness becomes visible. People begin to see strength where there was once confusion, clarity where there was once contradiction, and power where there was once doubt. This is what shocks them, not a sudden transformation, but the realization that what they sensed in you all along has finally come into form. There is a version of you that others already believe exists, even before you fully recognize it. They see potential in your silence, depth in your restraint, strength in your patience. And when you begin to align with that deeper self, their perception intensifies. Because now, what was hidden is becoming real. Do not underestimate what is being perceived beyond your awareness. You are communicating constantly, even in stillness, even in absence, even in moments when you feel unseen. What people secretly see in you is not always comfortable, but it is revealing. It is a mirror, not only of who you are, but of what is waiting to emerge. The question is not whether they see something powerful in you. The question is whether you are willing to see it yourself, because once you do, nothing remains the same, and neither do you. The hidden self operates beneath awareness, yet it leaves traces in everything a person does, in tone, in expression, in hesitation, in the subtle rhythm of behavior that cannot be easily controlled or rehearsed. While the conscious mind constructs a version of identity shaped by intention, social expectation, and personal narrative, there remains a deeper layer that does not obey these rules. This layer expresses itself indirectly, revealing truths that the conscious self may avoid, deny, or simply fail to recognize. Others, observing from the outside, are not limited by the same internal filters, and so they often perceive patterns, contradictions, and qualities that remain invisible to the individual experiencing them. A person may believe they are confident, yet their micro-expressions, their posture, or their need for validation communicates uncertainty. Another may see themselves as ordinary, while others sense a quiet intensity, a depth of thought, or a latent strength that has not yet been claimed. These perceptions are not necessarily judgments, but reflections of what leaks through the boundary between the conscious and the unconscious. The hidden self does not remain hidden in the way people assume. It reveals itself through slips in behavior, through emotional reactions that seem disproportionate, through choices that defy logical explanation. There is also a paradox in how people relate to one another. What is unconscious in one person often resonates with the unconscious in another. This creates a kind of silent recognition, where individuals respond not only to what is presented on the surface, but to what is felt beneath it. Someone who has not confronted their own fears may react strongly to another person's quiet courage, sensing it as both admirable and unsettling. Someone who suppresses their emotions may be drawn to or disturbed by another's emotional openness, even if they cannot explain why. These reactions are not random, but are rooted in the unseen dynamics of the psyche. The hidden self also carries unresolved tensions, unexpressed desires, and disowned traits. When these elements remain unacknowledged, they do not disappear, but instead influence perception and behavior from the background. Others may notice these inconsistencies more clearly than the individual themselves. They may sense insincerity where the person believes they're being genuine, or they may recognize potential where the person sees limitation. This difference in perception can create confusion, especially when feedback from others does not align with self-image. At times, this can feel uncomfortable or even threatening, as it challenges the stability of the identity one has constructed. Yet it also offers an opportunity. The fact that others can perceive aspects of the hidden self suggests that these aspects are already active, already shaping reality, already part of one's presence in the world. They are not distant possibilities, but immediate truths waiting to be recognized. The more one becomes aware of these underlying elements, the less fragmented their experience becomes, and the more aligned their inner and outer expressions start to feel. This process requires attention, not judgment, and a willingness to observe oneself without the need to immediately correct or defend. It involves noticing patterns in how others respond, not as absolute truths, but as clues pointing toward something deeper. Over time, what was once hidden becomes more familiar, less intimidating, and more integrated into the conscious sense of self. The boundary between what is known and unknown begins to shift, revealing that much of what seemed invisible was always present, quietly influencing perception, shaping relationships, and leaving impressions on others long before it was fully understood. Projection operates as a subtle psychological mechanism through which individuals encounter parts of themselves without realizing it. When a person attributes qualities, emotions, or intentions to someone else, they are often responding not only to the external individual, but to something within their own inner world that remains unacknowledged. This process unfolds automatically, bypassing conscious awareness and shaping perception in ways that feel convincing and real. What makes projection powerful is that it disguises internal material as external reality, allowing a person to avoid confronting aspects of themselves that may feel uncomfortable, threatening, or incompatible with their self-image. In interactions, this dynamic becomes visible through disproportionate reactions. A person may feel an intense admiration, irritation, or distrust towards someone without clear justification. These emotional responses often carry more intensity than the situation demands, suggesting that something deeper is being activated. The other person becomes a kind of screen onto which hidden traits are cast. If someone has suppressed their own ambition, they may perceive another as overly competitive or arrogant. If they deny their vulnerability, they may judge another's openness as weakness. In this way, what is seen in the other is not purely about the other, but about what has been pushed out of awareness within the observer. This does not mean that perception is entirely false, but it is layered. There may be a real trait in the other person, yet the emotional charge surrounding it often originates from within. The psyche uses projection as a way to encounter disowned aspects indirectly. Instead of recognizing a quality internally, it is experienced as something external, creating distance from it. This distance allows temporary psychological comfort, but it also prevents integration. What remains unrecognized continues to influence perception and behavior, shaping relationships in repetitive and often confusing ways. Projection also explains why certain individuals evoke strong and specific reactions in others. Some people become symbols of what others fear, desire, or reject within themselves. Without intending to, they carry meanings that go beyond their actual behavior. One person may be seen as intimidating, another as inspiring, another as untrustworthy, not solely because of who they are, but because of what they represent to those observing them. These interpretations are not consciously chosen, yet they feel immediate and convincing, reinforcing beliefs that may never be questioned. When multiple people project onto the same individual, that person may find themselves misunderstood or placed into roles they did not choose. They may be admired for qualities they do not fully see in themselves, or criticized for traits they do not consciously express. This can create a sense of confusion, as the feedback they receive does not always align with their internal experience. However, it also reveals the extent to which perception is shaped by the inner world of the observer, rather than by objective reality alone. Recognizing projection requires a shift in attention. Instead of focusing entirely on the perceived qualities of others, one begins to examine their own emotional responses. The question changes from what is wrong or right about the other person to why a particular reaction feels so strong or persistent. This does not invalidate the external observation, but adds another layer of understanding. It opens the possibility that what is being noticed may also exist in some form within oneself. As awareness develops, projection loses some of its unconscious power. The qualities once seen only in others begin to be recognized internally, reducing the need to assign them outwardly. This process does not eliminate perception, but refines it, making it less distorted and more grounded. Relationships become less reactive and more reflective as individuals engage with each other with greater clarity and less unconscious interference. Through this process, what was once hidden behind projection becomes part of conscious awareness. The traits that were difficult to face begin to feel less threatening, more understandable, and ultimately more integrated into the broader sense of self-silence is often misunderstood as absence, yet it carries a presence that words cannot easily replicate. When a person chooses not to speak, not to react immediately, or not to fill every space with explanation, something else begins to emerge. There is a kind of communication that exists beneath language, shaped not by what is said, but by what is withheld. This form of expression is subtle, yet it can be more revealing than any carefully constructed statement. Others sense it, even if they cannot articulate what they are perceiving. They feel the weight of restraint, the intention behind distance, the quiet certainty that does not require validation. In a world where expression is often equated with visibility, silence can appear unusual, even unsettling. People expect reactions, responses, and confirmations. When these are absent, the mind begins to search for meaning. It fills the gap with interpretation, often projecting significance onto what remains unspoken. This is where silence gains its power. It creates space, and in that space, others confront their own assumptions, expectations, and insecurities. What is not said becomes as important as what could have been said, and the absence of reaction becomes a form of influence. Restraint operates in a similar way. It is not suppression, but a conscious decision to hold back, to observe rather than immediately engage. This requires awareness because the impulse to react is often automatic. When a person chooses restraint, they interrupt that impulse, allowing a different kind of response to take shape. Others notice this even if only intuitively. They recognize a level of control that suggests depth, a capacity to remain centered rather than being pulled into every external stimulus. This creates an impression of strength, not through dominance, but through stability. Distance, too, carries meaning beyond physical separation. It is not always rejection or indifference, but can be a reflection of boundaries, of clarity about what is necessary and what is not. When someone maintains distance, they alter the dynamic of interaction. They are not fully available in the way others might expect, and this shifts the balance of attention. People often become more aware of what is not easily accessible. The absence of constant presence can intensify perception, making each interaction more significant. This does not happen through effort, but through the natural effect of limitation. Together, silence, restraint, and distance form a kind of language that does not rely on direct expression. It is a language of presence rather than performance. While words can be shaped, adjusted, or even manipulated, these qualities are more difficult to imitate without genuine inner alignment. They reflect an internal state that is not dependent on external validation. When a person is comfortable with silence, capable of restraint, and clear in their distance, it suggests that they are not driven solely by the need to be understood or accepted. This can have a profound effect on others. Some may feel drawn to this kind of presence, sensing a depth that is not immediately accessible. Others may feel discomfort, as it does not provide the usual cues that guide interaction. Without constant feedback, they are left to interpret, to question, to engage more actively in understanding what stands before them. In this way, silence does not withdraw from communication, but transforms it into something more complex and less predictable. There is also a discipline involved in maintaining this kind of presence. It requires tolerating misunderstanding, allowing others to form interpretations that may not always align with intention. It means accepting that not everything needs to be clarified or explained. This can feel counterintuitive. especially in environments where expression is valued above all else. Yet it creates a different kind of impact, one that is not immediate but often more lasting. Over time, the consistent use of silence, restraint, and distance shapes how a person is perceived. It builds an image not through repetition of words, but through the coherence of behavior. Others begin to associate this presence with stability, depth, and a certain kind of quiet authority. This authority does not demand attention, yet it receives it. It does not impose itself, yet it influences the atmosphere around it. What makes this form of communication powerful is not its intensity, but its subtlety. It does not overwhelm, but it lingers. It invites interpretation rather than forcing understanding. And in doing so, it reveals that the absence of words is not emptiness, but a different kind of expression, one that speaks through what remains unspoken and felt rather than explicitly stated. The shadow exists as the unacknowledged dimension of the psyche, composed of qualities, impulses, and tendencies that the conscious mind has rejected or failed to integrate. It is not inherently negative, yet it often contains elements that conflict with the image a person wishes to maintain. Because of this, it is pushed out of awareness, forming a layer of hidden material that continues to influence behavior without direct recognition. What remains unseen internally does not become inactive. Instead, it gathers intensity and expresses itself indirectly, shaping the emotional atmosphere a person carries into every interaction. This unseen dimension becomes perceptible to others, not through explicit action, but through energy, tone, and subtle inconsistencies. People respond to what they feel often before they understand what they are observing. The shadow communicates through micro-expressions, shifts in posture, hesitation in speech, and emotional reactions that seem disproportionate to the situation. These signals are not consciously produced, yet they are consistently present, creating an impression that others register intuitively. What is disowned internally becomes externalized in a form that others react to without always knowing why. A person who suppresses anger may appear calm on the surface, yet others sense tension beneath that calmness. The restraint feels forced rather than natural, creating unease in those who interact with them. Someone who denies their need for recognition may unconsciously seek validation in indirect ways, causing others to perceive a subtle neediness that contradicts their stated independence. These contradictions are not deliberate, but emerge from the split between the conscious identity and the hidden shadow. The more rigid the separation, the more noticeable the underlying tension becomes. The energy of the shadow does not remain neutral. It seeks expression, and when it is not consciously acknowledged, it manifests in distorted or exaggerated forms. Others pick up on this distortion, responding not only to what is visible, but to what is implied. This is why certain individuals evoke strong reactions that seem disproportionate to their actions. The reaction is often directed toward the shadow they carry rather than the persona they present. It is an encounter with something deeper, something that resonates with the unconscious of the observer. There is also a reciprocal dynamic at play. The shadow in one person interacts with the shadow in another, creating a field of mutual influence. When two individuals meet, their unacknowledged aspects begin to interact beneath the surface of conscious communication. This interaction can produce attraction, conflict, or a mixture of both, depending on how these hidden elements align or clash. The intensity of these encounters often reflects the degree to which the shadow remains unintegrated. What is not recognized internally becomes amplified externally through these interactions. Ignoring the shadow does not diminish its presence. It continues to shape perception and behavior, often in ways that contradict conscious intention. A person may strive to appear composed, yet repeatedly find themselves in situations that provoke emotional reactions they cannot fully explain. Others may respond with caution, curiosity, or resistance, sensing something that does not align with the surface presentation. This creates a feedback loop where the individual feels misunderstood, while others feel they are responding to something real, but difficult to define. Awareness introduces a shift in this dynamic. When a person begins to recognize the elements they have disowned, the energy bound within the shadow starts to change. It becomes less reactive, less distorted, and more integrated into the overall personality. This does not mean that the shadow disappears, but that it becomes part of conscious experience rather than an unseen force operating from behind the scenes. As this integration develops, the signals that others perceive also change. The tension decreases and the presence becomes more coherent, more aligned. The reactions of others begin to reflect this shift. Instead of responding to hidden contradictions, they encounter a more unified expression. The energy that once created confusion or discomfort transforms into something clearer, more stable, and easier to engage with. This change is not achieved through performance or control, but through the gradual acknowledgement of what was previously denied. The shadow, once a source of unconscious influence, becomes a source of depth and authenticity, altering not only how one experiences themselves, but how they are experienced by others. Authenticity carries a quiet intensity that does not depend on performance, approval, or adaptation to shifting expectations. It emerges when a person no longer organizes their identity around what is acceptable or desirable in the eyes of others, but instead aligns with what feels internally true. This alignment is not loud or dramatic, yet it is unmistakable. It creates a coherence between thought, emotion, and action that is difficult to imitate. Others sense this coherence immediately, not always through conscious analysis, but through a subtle recognition that something is real, unfiltered, and grounded. For those who have built their identity around masks, this presence can feel unsettling. A mask is not merely deception, but a structure designed to maintain safety, belonging, or control. It is shaped over time, reinforced by experience, and often becomes so familiar that it feels like the self. When someone encounters authenticity, it disrupts this structure. It introduces a contrast that cannot be easily ignored. The difference between what is natural and what is constructed becomes more visible, not through direct comparison, but through the experience of being in the presence of something that does not rely on the same defenses. This disruption is not always consciously recognized. It often appears as discomfort, resistance, or subtle tension. A person may feel uncertain around someone who is authentic, not because of anything explicitly threatening, but because the usual patterns of interaction no longer apply. There is less predictability, less opportunity to control perception, less space to hide behind rehearsed responses. The absence of pretense creates a kind of openness that can feel exposing even when no direct challenge is being made. Authenticity also removes the unspoken agreements that often govern social interaction. Many interactions rely on mutual performance, where individuals present curated versions of themselves and expect the same in return. This creates a sense of stability as both parties operate within familiar boundaries. When one person steps outside of this pattern, the balance shifts. The interaction becomes less about maintaining appearances and more about encountering what is actually present. This shift can feel disorienting for those who depend on the predictability of masks. There is also an element of reflection involved. Authenticity acts as a mirror, not by intention but by contrast. It highlights the distance between what a person is and what they present. This reflection is not imposed, yet it becomes difficult to ignore. The presence of someone who is aligned with themselves can bring attention to the areas where alignment is lacking in others. This is not always comfortable, as it touches on questions that may have been avoided or suppressed. The reaction to this reflection varies, but it often includes a mixture of curiosity and resistance. Some may feel drawn to authenticity, sensing in it a possibility for their own experience. Others may feel challenged, interpreting it as a disruption to their established way of being. In some cases, there may be attempts to dismiss or undermine what is perceived, not because it lacks value, but because it creates tension with existing beliefs or identities. These reactions are not necessarily conscious choices, but responses to the shift that authenticity introduces into the relational dynamic. Maintaining authenticity requires a certain tolerance for this kind of response. It involves remaining aligned even when it does not produce immediate acceptance or understanding. It means allowing others to interpret, react, or withdraw without altering one's internal position to accommodate their expectations. This is not rigidity, but consistency, a willingness to remain connected to what is internally true despite external variation. Over time, authenticity reshapes the way interactions unfold. It reduces the need for constant adjustment and creates a clearer sense of presence. Others begin to respond not to a constructed image, but to something more stable and consistent. This does not eliminate misunderstanding, but it changes its nature. The interaction becomes less about navigating appearances and more about engaging with what is genuinely there. In this way, authenticity influences not only how a person is perceived, but how they relate to the world around them. It alters the dynamics of connection, replacing performance with presence, and in doing so, it reveals how much of ordinary interaction depends on what remains unspoken. An unexamined inner alignment emerges when the different layers of a person's inner world begin to move in the same direction, when thoughts are not in conflict with emotions, when actions are not disconnected from values, and when intention is not fragmented by doubt or contradiction. This state does not arise suddenly, nor is it something that can be imitated through external behavior alone. It develops gradually, often through periods of confusion, self-examination, and the recognition of inconsistencies that were once overlooked. As these inner divisions begin to resolve, a subtle coherence takes shape, and this coherence becomes perceptible to others in ways that are difficult to define yet impossible to fully ignore. There is a distinct quality to a person who is internally aligned. Their presence feels stable, not because they control every outcome, but because they are not divided within themselves. This lack of inner conflict reduces the need for constant adjustment in response to external pressures. They do not shift their identity to match each situation, nor do they rely heavily on approval to maintain their sense of self. Instead, there is a continuity in how they think, feel, and act, creating a kind of consistency that others begin to recognize, even if they cannot immediately explain why it stands out. This presence communicates through subtle signals rather than overt displays. It can be felt in the way a person listens without distraction, in the way they respond without excessive hesitation, and in the way they maintain composure without appearing rigid. There is an absence of internal noise that often manifests as clarity in external behavior. This clarity does not mean certainty in every decision, but it reflects a connection to an internal reference point that remains steady even when circumstances change. Others often respond to this alignment on an intuitive level. Some may feel a sense of trust, sensing that what they see is not a constructed image but a genuine expression. Others may feel curiosity, drawn to the stability that contrasts with the more fragmented experiences they are accustomed to. There may also be those who feel discomfort, as this kind of presence can highlight their own inner inconsistencies without any direct confrontation. These reactions are not caused by deliberate influence, but by the natural effect of coherence in an environment where fragmentation is common. What makes inner alignment difficult to explain is that it does not rely on a single visible trait. It is not defined by confidence alone, nor by calmness, intelligence, or any specific characteristic. It is the integration of many elements into a unified whole. This integration reduces contradictions, allowing a person to move through situations with a sense of continuity rather than constant recalibration. Others perceive this as a form of depth, a sense that there is more beneath the surface than what is immediately visible. There is also a certain economy in how an aligned individual expresses themselves. They do not feel compelled to fill every silence or justify every decision. Their words tend to carry weight because they are not used excessively or without intention. This restraint is not forced but arises naturally from the absence of internal conflict. When there is less need to prove or defend, communication becomes more precise and presence becomes more pronounced. Developing this state involves confronting aspects of the self that may have been ignored or avoided. It requires acknowledging contradictions rather than suppressing them, and gradually bringing different parts of the psyche into dialogue with one another. This process is not always comfortable, as it challenges established patterns and familiar identities. Yet through this engagement, the internal landscape becomes less divided, and the sense of self becomes more grounded. As alignment deepens, the external impact becomes more noticeable. People may find it difficult to categorize or fully understand the source of this presence, yet they respond to it nonetheless. It influences interactions without the need for overt assertion, shaping the atmosphere in subtle ways. This influence is not based on control or dominance, but on coherence, on the absence of internal contradiction that allows a person to exist as a unified expression rather than a collection of competing impulses. In this way, inner alignment creates a form of presence that extends beyond explanation. It is experienced rather than analyzed, recognized rather than defined, and it leaves an impression that persists even when the reasons for it remain unclear.